We will begin with our lunchtime panel on, posed in a Socratic way, why do students need free speech on campus? And I won't introduce Nicole, I'll just turn the stage over to her. This is Nicole Taylor, Deputy Vice President and Dean of the Arizona State University Tempe campus. Thank you, Nicole.
Great, thank you. Thanks for coming and thanks for being here. I'm about to introduce our great panel, and when we had our preparation call, we were all excited that at an academic conference we actually had student voice coming from the stage. So we are excited to be in front of you today, and I think we're going to be hearing some great conversation amongst the panel, and also open it up to the floor for questions to the panel. So first we have Gabriel Sandler on my right. Gabriel is a graduate student here at Arizona State University in the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication. He is a master's student in projects ranging from Aboriginal Australia, opioid addiction in Arizona, and the presidential election. He is focused on community engagement, intersecting with different types of reporting. He is interested in diplomacy, human rights, and forms of advocacy. And next to Gabriel, we have Matthew Foldi, who flew in from Chicago last week. And welcome to Matthew's parents. They also are here with him. He's a senior at the University of Chicago, where he has been at the forefront of advocating for free speech on campuses across the country. In his second year, he rallied students and almost 50 professors to support a student government resolution supporting free expression. In his third year, he worked with the University of Chicago's administration to plan the first ever student-run free expression conference on campus with students from around the country in attendance. After the conference, he founded Students for Free Expression, an international group of students working to enhance support for free speech on campuses here in the United States, in Canada, and in Mexico. And then to my left, we have Francesca Price. You have some fans in there? Yes. Yeah. Francesca Price, who is also here at Arizona State University as a master's student in the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication. She is a bilingual multimedia journalist and has worked professionally in radio broadcast, print, and digital media in the United States and internationally. With an interest in foreign affairs and a background in the UK and Italy, I just learned, Taya aspires to continue reporting on local and global issues. And then next to Taya, we have Zach Wood. Zach is a senior at Williams College, where he has served as president of Uncomfortable Learning, a student group that sparked national controversy for inviting provocative speakers to campus. Last summer, he was a Robert L. Bartley Fellow at the Wall Street Journal, and his recent work has appeared in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, The Nation, Times Higher Education, and Slam Magazine. A Washington, D.C. native, Wood currently resides in New York City. And I'd like to point out this is the last quarter or semester for all of the students here. They are about to be unleashed into the world, and we will be the better for it, I think. So please join me in welcoming our panel. Let me start with you, Gabriel. So what we're going to do, I've asked each of them to prepare about 5 to 7 minutes of introductory remarks, and so we'll go through all of the panel, and then I want a conversation amongst them, because I have a feeling there'll be some questions that they may have for each other, and then ask if there's any questions on the floor, and then I have some specific questions for them as well. So, Gabriel.
Can you hear me okay? How about now?
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you all for being here. When I think about free speech on campus, I focus on 3 broad ideas. 1, offensive speech is not unimportant. 2, that free speech doesn't have to just take one form. And 3, that the answer to offensive speech is always more speech. I always come back to this one time in a journalism ethics course that I was in. We were debating the timing of a story about an elderly man in the Northeast outed as a former concentration camp guard, which surprised his community and his family. We were asking whether the paper should have published the story or waited until he died. I thought the answer was simple, that we both had a responsibility to report news like this, but didn't have the right to decide how information about the Holocaust gets treated. And I felt this way as a Jew, but thought it would make sense to everyone. A peer of mine disagreed, and actually argued that this man had, when younger, just made a mistake. and didn't deserve to have his life ruined now. And when I countered, the peer kind of angrily lashed out, denied calling the man's Nazism a mistake, and asserted that he had been taught forgiveness and nothing was going to turn him away from that. It really stunned me. His angry reaction stunned me, and my other classmates' uncertainty about how the paper treated the story stunned me. It was 3 years ago, and I still think about it, and it still bothers me. But if I could go back in time and stop my peer from expressing this view, go back and stop the discussion, I wouldn't do that. Yes, his reaction offended me, but I also learned something from it. And a person with nothing left to learn has nowhere left to go. In this setting where our speech was rooted in a discussion, his reaction was useful, not dangerous. Yes, it made me uncomfortable, it made me sad, it even made me pretty angry. But I could respond, so could my classmates, so could my professor. It's a good example of why speech that challenges us really matters, and universities are one of the few places where that kind of dialogue can happen. Here at universities, we have the resources not just to protect free speech, but promote and empower free speech. As a journalism student, this effort is especially important to my education. The most recent presidential election was really marked by division and kept people from talking to each other, and it changed how people viewed each other's speech. During this time, I was part of a community engagement team for Cronkite News, which is the reporting bureau for the Cronkite School. And with training and resources, we were able to cover the election in a way that was fair, balanced, and prioritized participation and inclusion. Echo chambers can be very easy to make and can be very dangerous. But my role in the election was to produce coverage that broke through that. And my role was possible because of the university. ASU and the Cronkite School gave students the resources to elevate free speech in a time when it really mattered both on and off campus. In hindsight, having been at ASU almost 5 years now, the best part of my college experiences took place in the real world amongst dialogue, discussion, conflict, and controversy. And I think universities and students really benefit from that kind of experience. The Committee on Freedom of Expression at University of Chicago issued a report, and they talked about the solemn responsibility that universities have to both promote and protect free speech. And when they stop doing that, they're no longer a university. And that's something I agree with. I think democracy requires a competitive and thoughtful marketplace of ideas where the most compelling ideas have a chance to rise above. And that's really at risk when we narrow ourselves and can't deal constructively with others. When we lose freedom of speech, we lose something really important that's both educational, useful, and stabilizing. But I think universities, faculty, administrators, and most importantly, students can be a real answer to that problem, not just on campus, but for a much bigger community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to Arizona State University for hosting this incredibly important event. My name is Matthew Foldi, and I'm a senior at the University of Chicago. It's great to be so close to Phoenix because although most people don't realize we have an athletic program, our mascot is actually Phil the Phoenix. So I feel right at home other than the fact that it's 40 degrees warmer than I'm used to it being in February. So the University of Chicago's motto is let knowledge grow from more to more, and so be human life enriched. And this really embodies what I expected to gain from my time at the University of Chicago from well before I even got to campus. And all of this goes well beyond John Stuart Mill's theoretical marketplace of ideas, because there were so many concepts I didn't even know anything about before I set foot on campus, so I couldn't even participate in a marketplace before I got there. Now, we're all in college to learn, and since we're all different, it's inevitable that we will have conflicting ideas. Free speech allows us to air our disagreements without resorting to violence, as we did in the past. Unfortunately, a lot of recent events have shown that when colleges fail to protect free speech, violence can sometimes be right around the corner. Now, in school, when we grapple with academic debates between people like Kenneth Waltz and Scott Sagan about the wisdom of nuclear proliferation, for example, the best way to do that is actually to debate. We're expected to do it in class for essays, and it's a vital skill to have for life. Imagine a workplace where no one felt able to challenge a wrong-headed development goal. Time and money would be wasted. And a key component of any education is to teach students how to think and how to prepare ourselves for the world outside of college. And the ability to disagree without being disagreeable is an important part of that. Now imagine a world without free speech. Cutting-edge research would be curtailed, students would all express the same ideas out of fear, and no one would actually learn anything. The distillation of my point is best summarized in 2 quotes. One from the English priest Ronald Knox, who said that you do not believe what your grandfathers believed, and have no reason to believe that your grandsons will believe what you do. And the other from the always quotable George Orwell, who said that if liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear. So Knox is incredibly accurate here. Consider how quickly norms and laws can change. What we are certain of today is not something that our kids and grandkids will necessarily believe, and in fact may even find intolerable. And it's hard to say what those concepts might be, but that's exactly the point. Who can be so certain that they know everything and that others therefore can't express their thoughts? No one. There's no real arbiter of truth when you're on a university campus. And now I would much rather there be a wide open market than a heavily regulated one. Orwell's quote emphasizes something crucial to the state of free speech on college campuses today. No one wants to censor popular views, but rather the more unorthodox opinions on the right and on the left are the ones that people all too often do suppress. Look at DePaul University just a few miles away from me in Chicago, where in the span of just a few months, the administration cracked down on both college Republicans and college socialists. Their actions in recent years led the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education to just create a new award specifically for them to point out how terrible they are. And all of this is not to say that all speech is worthy of protecting. So you are all incredibly lucky that Jeff Stone, a University of Chicago law professor, and the most prominent First Amendment scholar out there today is coming here in a few months. I took his class on the First Amendment last year, and it was one of my favorite classes, and we clearly learned that there are very bright lines that years of Supreme Court precedent have laid out as to what speech is illegal. Now, I don't support unconstitutional speech at all, but aside from that, it is an incredibly slippery slope to ban speech based on the majority's opposition, or even a small heckler's veto. And this term, by the way, was created by a different University of Chicago professor, Harry Kelvin. Now, can speech harm? Of course. And I've been on the receiving ends of nasty protected speech as well as illegal death threats, so I'm well aware of this. That said, I don't view this as an issue with shades of gray. For me, speech is either legal or it is not. And a great anecdote that jumps to my mind that sort of summarizes a lot of what we're talking about here today and what it means to have free speech on campuses is when DeRay McKesson, a Black Lives Matter leader, came to our college Republicans meeting that I run, and we had an incredibly good conversation with him about his activism, where it comes from, where it's going. And we actually found some surprising areas of agreement on really important issues like welfare reform. And this free and open exchange of ideas left everyone better off. He had never been to a college Republicans meeting, and we learned a lot from him as well. Now, one thing I leave you all with before we get to the panel itself is that yes, students need free speech, but importantly, we also need to know that we're not alone. And in my first 2 years of advocating for free speech at my campus, I was more or less a one-man army. Last year, my administration reached out to me and we ended up hosting a student-run conference on free expression with students from around the country in attendance. And since then, we've started Students for Free Expression, an organization with students in 3 countries and over 40 campuses, as well as over 1,600 people from around the world who've signed our statement of principles that you can also sign at tinyurl.com/freeexpression. And conferences like these are great to have, but it's essential that we take the time to meet other people here because left, right, or center, we're all going to be working on this together, and the future of education quite literally depends on it. Thank you all so much. I look forward to continuing this conversation on our excellent panel and beyond.
So far I'm going to be echoing our previous 2 panelists, but really to me the concept of free speech, specifically on campus, is synonymous to the purpose of what higher education is. And really when you think about it as students, perhaps we like to generalize and say, okay, well, I'm getting a college education because that's going to make me more marketable in the future. And that's true, and that is also a mindset that I subscribe to, so I can't really criticize it, when you think of student loans and everything else that we're sinking ourselves into. But I do think that, perhaps this is idealistic to say, but when you're going to college, you're going to be presented with perspectives that are very different from your own and perhaps different than any that you've ever experienced. And this is because this is the time when you're formulating who you are as an adult and figuring out, okay, this is what I believe and this is what I don't believe in. And I think that this is a time when you're stepping out of your comfort zone and it's necessary to do so. And that's really what is leading you to exercise empathy, or learn how to exercise empathy. And this is what I believe is effective communication, which, of course, as a journalist or a young journalist, this is what kind of led me into my career choice. And I think that by having conversations and having debates, you will understand why people believe the way that they do. And maybe in today's current climate, that is difficult because there seems to be an unwillingness to hear the other side or to hear a perspective that is different than your own, which is why I think that colleges, it's imperative that you start to teach students that, if not at an earlier age. The other question that we were asked to address is what it means for students to have free expression on campus. And I really can't generalize and say that I can speak for everybody. I can really only speak for myself. And for me, yes, as a journalist, the First Amendment is very important and free speech is very important. But as someone who's always been very inquisitive, I think that free expression on campus is just, it comes down to feeling liberated. When I was little and in primary and secondary school, there were definitely circumstances in which I was too vocal or overthinking, or I think the best quote was that I was making life difficult for myself because I was going up against the school board and questioning certain curriculum changes and everything like that. So thankfully I had the luxury of a very supportive family and good friends who always said, no, just keep asking questions. That's what it should be. That's how things should continue. And so they taught me 3 crucial lessons, which is that to earn trust, you have to be genuine, but you have to be empathetic. To save time, you need to be direct, and to get answers, you need to go to the source. So sort of coming away with those lessons at 17 or 18, it's little wonder why I ended up in journalism, which thankfully led me here to ASU and led me to the Cronkite School. And I have to say that it's the first place where I've never felt limited, whether in a classroom or whether at events like this, when you're actually allowed to express your opinions. And I think that's a testament to teachers, it's a testament to administrators, and it's really a testament to my peers. And so by feeling empowered to express myself freely, I think that's kind of led me or refueled my interest in journalism to lend a voice to other people. And I think that that isn't a unique situation, the one that I found myself in. I think that when students come to college and come to university, that might be the very first time that they have been encouraged to think critically for themselves and to express themselves. And so it's not a place to preemptively limit conversations because we want to tiptoe around people's feelings or, be concerned about what topics are brought up in a classroom. And right now, we see a number of social movements, and looking just even at the tragedy this past week. And we see people demonstrating how powerful their voices can be. And I think that we're having a societal reckoning, and we're having conversations about what we're going to accept and what we absolutely will not accept. But we can't draw those determinations or arrive at those answers if we're scared to ask the questions. And so I think that understanding free expression and having the opportunities to implement it, whether that's on a college campus or ideally earlier in a student's education, I think is absolutely imperative.
Thank you.
Well, first I want to say that I'm honored to be here and thank you all for coming. Thank you, Dean Taylor, for the introduction. My name is Zach Wood. I am the president of Uncomfortable Learning at Williams College, and I've been the president of Uncomfortable Learning for the past 2 years. And the main mission of the group is to invite speakers with controversial views. Oftentimes, those speakers happen to be conservatives because on my campus, as on many other universities and college campuses, it tends to be the case that liberal views are more prominent on campus. And so what I've tried to do over the last 2 years is to make the point that it's important for students to engage thoughtfully in discussion and debate of controversial topics. And for me, what I really think it comes down to is learning and preparing yourself to be a contributing member of society. When I think about why free speech really matters for students on campus, I think it matters because what we're really trying to do is deepen our understanding of the world, to gain a deeper understanding of humanity. And in order to do that, I think we have to be able to ask difficult questions. I think we have to try to reach a closer approximation of the truth, yet always understanding that the world is a very complicated place, that issues are naturally very complex, and that we can always gain something from thinking about perspectives that are unfamiliar to us. So I when I think about the issue and when I discuss the issue, I try to draw attention to the fact that intellectual humility, for me, involves thinking about arguments in terms of, obviously, of course, what you think and the principles that you have and what's at stake, but also thinking about what you can gain from what you know less about. And so I think that in terms of thinking about why free speech matters and how we can best protect it on college campuses and what we can do in that regard, whether we're administrators or students or educators, I think we should try to understand the views of those who disagree. So if we're a free speech purist or absolutist or close to that, we should try to understand those who think it should be limited. If we are of the opinion that we think that it's important to first consider hurtful and hateful speech and the damage that that can cause, then we should try to understand best the case for why it's important to have free speech on campus. For me, it comes down to learning, and I'm glad to be here, and I'm hoping to do a lot more of that, and I'm eager to get to questions and discussions and even objections, because I think this is certainly a topic that has such. Thank you.
I want to ask if you have questions of each other. Now that you've heard each other speak and give your introductory remarks. I saw Teo writing some questions down, so maybe Teo, if you want to start with that.
I have a question for Gabriel, but I think I actually might know the answer to this because we were in the same class together. When you gave the little anecdote about the student, after that class was done, what was the engagement like, and did the conversation continue at all?
Well, first thing I did, went to my professor and said, "Am I being crazy?" And he said no, which was reassuring. To be honest, that peer and I were not especially close, but I think that almost makes the class more important because without it, we wouldn't have engaged. I wouldn't have known this mindset was out there. The continued engagement is that I'm able to talk about this, and if that's the limit of it, then that's a pretty good basis to start from. I don't know what a renewed conversation would look like, which again makes that we have that freedom of expression on campus all the more important, because where else would it happen?
I have a question. Do you have one?
Yeah, for Zach, what's the best way to bring a controversial speaker to campus? How do you prepare people for what's going to offend them, when you think it's good for them and they're not so sure?
I think it's a great question, and it's one that I've thought a lot about. For me, it has not been an easy thing to do. Williams is a very small school. It's sort of geographically a little remote. The student body is only 2,300 students, and so everything feels more intimate. Everything feels more personalized. You see the same people, you know everyone by their name, and so when you bring controversial speakers to campus, it would be different than bringing a controversial speaker to, say, Arizona State University. And so what I've tried to do over the last 2 years is first explain why I'm doing it. I'm not trying to offend anyone. I'm not trying to harm anyone. What I'm trying to do is to provoke a discussion, to spark a debate, to get students to ask tough questions, to test their conclusions, and to rethink firmly held beliefs. And so for me, I've found that it's useful first to think about framing, because oftentimes I've noticed that there are some students who, when they hear the phrase free speech, or when they hear let's invite controversy, let's engage with controversy, they see it as being somewhat adversarial and not about learning. And so stressing first, I think the fact that what we really care about is education, improving our education, and having these conversations, I've found that's useful.
Sort of follow up on that, this is an obstacle I face in sort of getting people to care about this. Is a lot of people, and some people in the audience, have experienced social, professional consequences simply for caring about free speech, and a lot of students don't want to sort of put themselves out there, which is tragic. But Zach, people know what you do around the country, so I'm curious how obviously you are very outspoken about this, but how have you found is an effective way of getting people to sort of get up off the sidelines and support what you're doing when there's a lot of reluctance, at least initially, at least I found.
One thing I've tried to do is, it's difficult. It's been difficult for me to make traction and to make a lot of progress in terms of changing the entire community or the way people think about the intellectual community. But approaching people actually individually, I have made the most headway in that regard. When I'm able to sit down with someone over coffee, over lunch or dinner, and I'm able to explain to them what my rationale is for why I'm doing this, that as students here at Williams, it's very important for us to strengthen our own arguments, to develop a better understanding of the world in its full complexity, and that there is no truth, capital T, that these issues are inherently very complicated, and that we should all be striving for greater understanding. So I think, for me, I've found that when I approach people individually and I first ask the question of, what do you think about the work that I'm doing? What do you find most difficult about it? It allows me then to clarify the sort of discursive space and to think about it in a more nuanced way. And I've found that that can be helpful at times versus when I'm sort of at a podium sometimes and I'm addressing a group of people, you don't have the same interaction that you would have with someone when you speak to them one-on-one.
Okay, I'm going to jump in with a question, and I guess this is for all of us here, but do you think, this might be an unpopular idea, but do you think that our generation is quote-unquote hypersensitive? Because as you just said, in terms of people, taking things personally, and definitely there's a benefit to speaking one-on-one, but as a group, it's also people are like, oh my gosh, you're saying this against me. It's like, no, exactly. So what's your take on that?
I think, I do think it is the case that there is intolerance on college campuses. With regard to the phrase hypersensitivity, I've had a number of students who've come up to me and who really have a problem with it, and I try to avoid it only because I think it points to something important, which is a reluctance and unwillingness to engage with difficult issues, to engage with speech that is felt to be harmful and felt to be hurtful. I think sometimes it can seem, if someone's described as being hypersensitive, as if you don't really understand the pain that they feel when they hear speakers on campus, controversial speakers on campus. And so I try to stay away from describing it in that way, though I certainly understand what it's pointing to. And so I think one way of having that discussion or starting that conversation with people who are more reluctant to get on board with something like uncomfortable learning is to first make an effort to show them that you understand why it is that they find it so difficult in the first place.
Anyone else want to answer that?
Yeah, I can jump in on that. I think that doesn't matter as much. I mean, the hypersensitivity, if it exists, is more of an outgrowth of sort of other factors of our generation. And if you already don't use it, but FIRE's disinvitation database is, an unbelievable resource to use. And I mean, the obvious trend is that most speakers who are canceled, uninvited, et cetera, are on the right. And I think that if you look at this more broadly, the reason why that's the case is because there's no sort of broad familiarity with college students now of people on the left being systematically suppressed. So it's sort of an idea of, well, I'll never be censored. And that's just such a dangerous path to go down. So it's the other people being censored, not me. And I'm not saying we should censor people on the left as a response, but I think the lack of anything like that, which is healthy and we shouldn't be censoring the left, is one of the reasons why we've seen an outgrowth of people then jumping to censor the right because they think my ideas are impeccable, why would anyone want to censor me? Well, it's only a matter of time until that does happen. So I think that's a big problem that doesn't really get addressed too much because we sort of look at this in the here and now. We don't sort of look at like why we got here, and I think that's a big problem.
Yeah, I think the internet can make anybody into a parody, and that's certainly happened to people our age, millennials. I don't know that this generation is entirely different from other generations that have responded to something strongly. And so sometimes these maybe overreactions, maybe reactions to offensive speech, it's not meant as intolerance, it's a first attempt at engaging the issue. And maybe we don't all have the same toolkit to engage an issue, but I don't think at its heart it's meant to be malicious. I don't think that, you know, even people on the left that, you know, engage aggressively in protest, I don't think they're interested in suppression. They're interested in involvement and activism. And you just need the right language to do that. You know, if your protest turns into a riot, you've lost that narrative. You know, you're no longer, you know, exercising speech. You've crossed the line of suppressing it. So just navigating the line between expressing your thoughts without suppressing others, I think is something everybody has to learn.
I have a question for all of you as an administrator who's responsible for the safety of the student body and of the campus, and we have visitors who are uninvited who come on our campus a lot and are offensive to many people. And I'm just curious about your thoughts on what the university's role, the administration's role, should be, could be, for those who come on campus with, and we've seen this, and I've seen this in my prior lives, specifically to incite violence or incite harm and disrupt the campus community, and they are not from the campus community. So I'm not talking about student-on-student disagreements about an idea or a philosophy or an issue, but what do you think our role should be with people who, which is their right to express their opinion, but I've seen personally that they really are about agitating and inciting something, and there are violent groups out there who do come, you know, in reaction to an invited speaker, for example. What do you think the role of the university should be at that point?
I think the role of the university, as in so many things, is to teach. You make a space to prepare students for that reality and eventuality, because off campus too, we're going to encounter people interested in hurting us by inciting. You know, that's not unique to campuses. What is unique to campuses is the opportunity to have a discussion first. And, you know, just for example, every freshman at ASU goes into ASU 101. It's a half semester orienting program. You know, spaces like that are a great chance to tell students, you know, this is what you might encounter, and then ask, how do you think you should engage with that? And you make it a discussion. You know, if you overprotect students on campus, they're gonna be underprepared when they leave it. So you have to make sure they're prepared for what they're gonna see now and later on.
And so a couple of thoughts on this.
Yep.
So one is, it's important if you're having rules about stuff like this that they not only be content neutral, but that they be enforced in a content neutral way. So anyone who just shows up on campus has no reason to be able to stay on campus. But if that's, you know, only used against priests or anything else, then that's where you get into a problem. But I think that, I mean, we're having this right now at UChicago. A professor invited Steve Bannon, and the administration's response is, he's able to do that. It's incredibly dangerous for us to be allowing or not allowing professors to invite whoever they want. And in response, our student government allocated some funds for sort of counter programming, and they told me that, you know, if College Republicans wants to have a counter program or a program or whatever, we can do that, which I think is actually incredibly important, because normally all of these funds are just sort of allocated to respond to very specific people or arguments, and they're not done in a content neutral way. But I think that, you know, you have to distinguish if a speaker is coming to, you know, agitate people, incite, or disrupt the community. I mean, if they disrupt the community, there's nothing you can do about that. If they're agitating, there's nothing you can do about that. Like, another sort of underappreciated Supreme Court case is Terminiello v. Chicago, and I'm not just saying that because I'm in Chicago, but it's where a speaker was sort of whipping the audience up into a frenzy, saying some incredibly bigoted things, and the audience outside of the hall started throwing like eggs and shoes into the room, and the Supreme Court sided with Terminiello and said, the likelihood of a hostile audience reaction is not enough to be able to justify canceling a speaker. It's basically the heckler's veto. So, you know, at UChicago, what we would do is if there will be an event that is responded to with violence, the violence cannot happen, the event should go on. And the only speech that I would support not allowing is speech that is illegal. If a speaker is going to come and incite actual violence, and it's imminent. It is not like down the road. I mean, the Supreme Court's been very clear. If you're inciting potential violence down the road, that's not unconstitutional. If they're going to say, let's go destroy ASU in 30 seconds, and you know that, then that is a problem. But unless it's very specific, you're opening the door to a huge amount of problems. I think, the administration is sort of underappreciated in this whole context because they can make everyone's lives incredibly easy or incredibly difficult. But, our administration's sort of role is they facilitate the events happening. If people sort of want other stuff, they'll let that happen. But the event, whatever it is, barring illegal speech, should go on. And this is what the heckler's veto is. Like, just because people won't like it doesn't mean you can't have it happen. Like, my second year of college, Bernie Sanders was the first speaker of the year. And in the 1930s, when we had the Communist Party presidential candidate at UChicago, people were really angry about that. But now, no one cares if Bernie Sanders is there. So, if some college Republicans and I wanted to shut him down, the UChicago would say no, just as the same way if, the college Republicans of the 1930s, wanted to shut down the communists then, or if, the Hyde Park socialists want to shut down Steve Bannon, they'd say, sorry, this event is happening, go question him, whatever, protest all you want outside as long as you're not disrupting it. And I think the thing people don't realize is the only reason why half of these people who are sort of thought of as controversial are even known to anyone in this room is because they provoke these hostile audience reactions. So when the Westboro Baptist Church came to campus, everyone said, ignore them. There were 6 of them met by 20 protesters, and then the news cameras left because there wasn't anything newsworthy. I'm not saying you can't protest, but the only reason anyone knows who Richard Spencer is because people react to him crazily. The worst thing he could ever have happen is to be met with an empty room or a room of 2, nerds who left their basements to crawl out into the world, go hear what he had to say. Otherwise, he'd just be as anonymous Twitter troll as anyone else. So, if you don't like speech, you can ignore it, you can challenge it, you can protest it, and let it happen. But, any inclination to shut things down opens a lot of doors that we should not be opening.
Yeah.
I would just say I think that administrators should make a presumption in favor of free speech, and that in whatever ways possible, whenever possible, do whatever they can to allow an event to take place, but that the administration also plays an important role in how they discuss and explain the decision that they're making and allowing a speaker to come. And I think it's important for them to acknowledge that there are legitimate grievances that students have, that it's not easy for everyone to deal with this, and to point out that in an appropriate way, you're not forcing people to attend a talk, but you are allowing a space in which those who want to can choose to engage in it.
Yeah, we try to do that. So I feel proud of how we've been able to manage what could be some sticky situations. So thank you for affirming my gut.
Well, thank you for having the gut, because so many administrators are feckless and don't do anything right. So I'm glad you're here.
Thank you. So I want to open it up to the audience and to see if there's anyone who has, and there's a microphone on this side. And please name and where you're from, if you're a student here, what college you're in.
All right, my name's, is this working? Okay. My name's Corbin Witt. I'm an undergraduate student here at ASU. I'm part of the Hugh Downs School of Human Communication, as well as hoping to join up with the School for Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership. And I had a question pertaining a bit to what you were saying, as well as our previous speaker, Professor Post. The concept was brought up of universities serving a role in loco parentis and treating students as children with the responsibility to protect the sensibilities of those students. I personally believe that stands to be incorrect, as I moved from the state of Montana to Arizona for the express purpose of being away from my parents. But I wanted to see what the opinions you had on that issue was.
Yeah, if universities want to protect students, they prepare students. I didn't come here to be sheltered or accommodated or catered to, and I think I'm better off for any difficult situation I've been thrust into. And I referenced the election in my opening remarks. I was sent to go cover a Trump rally, which is not the easiest assignment for a university journalist to go do. And I was met with everything from just, disinterest to hostility. If, the university didn't let me do that, I would know less. And if we're talking about controversial speakers and whether or not to bring them, we shouldn't get too stuck in that debate, because I agree we favor speech, but we don't necessarily have to just bring speakers to campus or just not let them come. We can bring speakers and have it be a panel discussion like this, or a debate. We can be more creative in how we deal with controversy, and I think the results could be even better than just having a speaker. And, we shouldn't get trapped by false choices.
I mean, look, my parents are still here. Sometimes you can't escape your parents. You can't come to the university. Or visit another place. But I would say it's sort of a difference, like, in local apprentice, like, they treat you as their children. I mean, obviously that's, to keep you safe and whatnot, literally safe. I think it's a difference between being treated as their children and being treated as infants. And so, like, yes, I mean, they have an obligation to, basically be our parents while our parents are sometimes not on campus. But the problem is when they then, like, put you in a crib and like, put you in bubble wrap and, like, in the assumption that they're helping you. I mean, it's very rarely that, if a college is canceling an event, they actually say to students, hey, is this what you guys want? It's more like, this is going to be bad press for us if this happens. So I think the instinct to be our babysitters is more of the problem than sort of the legal obligation that they have to take care of us. And it's maybe well-intended, but there are very bad consequences. And I'm saying that as someone from Chicago, like, all we care about is theory, we don't care about practice at all. But there are serious consequences when you sort of take the theory and ignore the practical implications of it.
Any more, or do we want to?
I was just going to say, I think that we can see many examples nowadays where an administration's, again, as you said, job to make sure that students are taken care of physically and physical safety and even, mental safety is sometimes mistaken for, as Zach said earlier, being a little bit uncomfortable. And again, that's sort of echoing what I said at the beginning, which is that you're supposed to be coming to college to learn to think critically and to think in ways that you've maybe not thought before. And even if you don't change your opinions, at least you're reaffirming your own because you're hearing another side. So I think that, it's not about being coddled.
How about the next one? Is that good?
Yeah, I would just say briefly that I concur with a lot of that. I think in as far as safety goes, if you're having a controversial speaker, it's the administration's responsibility to think about safety measures that need to be taken such that that can be the most conducive space possible. Beyond that, no, I don't think it's the job of administrators to play a parental role. I think they're facilitating education, and that should be the focus.
Hello, I'm Hannah Grabowski. I'm an ASU student in the School of Social Transformation, and I think this is a perfect transition into one of my questions. So for context and for example, recently ASU administration canceled a student government event that was about sexual health and wellness education. And media relations was quoted saying, students are, and of course, welcome to invite speakers to campus, and they do so on a wide range of topics and issues. The university supports their right to do so. So my question is, to what extent do you think a university administration can prohibit students' choice to attend an optional event or seek education specifically on topics that the university does not directly provide?
I think that with respect to private colleges, I recognize the discretion that they have in deciding when they think it's appropriate to regulate or limit speech. I don't agree with it, and I don't think that that's the educational philosophy or perspective that they should take, but I recognize their right to do so. Beyond that, I think it's important to try to keep robust and open discussions to make them available and accessible in whatever ways are possible.
Yeah, and just whatever resources might be available to you to push through an attempt to limit, it's worthwhile to do so. Maybe they don't make a venue available to you, and you use a public space. universities are a great place for speech, but even as a student, this is not our end all. And this is not what we're limited to. So when we talk about free speech on campus, we're talking about how is the free speech on campus going to prepare us for free speech off campus. So if your event gets shut down, you can get off campus now.
And sort of add to what I was saying earlier, previously censoring never really worked either. But now with the internet, find me one example where something was censored and then successfully blocked out of existence in the United States of America. The only reason you're asking about whatever this event was because it was canceled, otherwise no one would know about it. So, there's this artwork at Polk University that Fire was posting about where it's some anti-Trump artwork. I don't think it's like particularly pretty or whatever, but the only reason I've seen it is because they said, we can't have this here. So all you do whenever you cancel an event or a speaker or class or artwork or whatever is you let the entire world know that it exists. So if your goal is to give something a ton of free publicity, cancel it and make a big deal about it, and then everyone will know what they were going to say. So, again, I only really support universities, public or private, canceling things if it is actually illegal. But just understand, you give everything so much more oxygen if you cancel it. So I think even if you hate the message, don't cancel it, because then someone else will pick it up and it will have way more of a platform than it could have had if it just happened wherever the context is.
Thank you.
Good day, my name is Joe McCoy. I'm an economics student with the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences here at ASU, and I wanted to bring back the topic that was brought up with regards to hypersensitivity, as whether or not we believe it is across our whole generational group, or if it's isolated to a few radical individuals. What do each of you attribute to the cause of this perceived hypersensitivity and ideological radicalization within our generation? And whether and how, and if you think it can be solved, because the way I see it, it's an immense threat if we have a whole generation coming up that is so ideologically sensitive and radical. Then how can we expect them to protect those rights once they start falling into Congress and higher offices within our country?
We're probably the loudest generation. We have the most ways to express ourselves. People can react to a lot more
than they would have otherwise. If you look at something like Twitter and I was on Twitter and I saw an ADL report about an increase in white supremacist material on campus. And I had a reaction to that, and I tweeted about that. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, I probably wouldn't have seen the report, and even if I had, who would I have told, and how loud would my voice have been? So I think that's where the perception of hypersensitivity comes from. You have a whole generation that can speak about a lot more and see a lot more. And I think that's ultimately a good thing. I think, and there's a lot of studies right now about how, kids in high school now, there's some upcoming mental health issues because they've been over-digitalized, they're not learning to interact. So I think at a younger age, we have to give kids more credit that they can learn more and engage more directly and intensely. I don't know what that age is, but I think to get ahead of it, you have to start earlier. Not that I think we're a lost generation, I just don't think the problem is as bad as some people say. Here we are. So something's working.
And then if I could jump in, I wouldn't say that hypersensitivity is something specific to our generation. Personally, I detest that, because speaking to people who are my parents' age, and that's both within the United States and then also internationally, there's a very similar mindset of I am right, I don't care what you have to say when it's on certain issues. And I think, Gabriel, I think it's really great. Thank you for bringing up the point of Twitter, because I wonder, yes, if this is an effect of social media, because it's changed the way a lot of us communicate, where we can put our idea out there, we can state it as fact, and then you have this streamline of responses afterwards, but no one's actually having a conversation. They're just having a one-sided, this is what I believe. And so I think that in terms of being solution-oriented, you ask, what can we do about it? I think it really does come down to learning how to be an effective communicator, and that comes down, like I said, to empathy. It's hearing the other side and being willing to engage in a conversation, to engage in a Socratic debate. So that's my response to that.
Thank you. We have one final question. Sorry, you have to. You want to respond?
I'll just add briefly that I think social media definitely contributes significantly to the perception of hypersensitivity. I think one other thing that might contribute to it is it's the idea that for some, in terms of making progress with regards to inclusion, people not only have to be present, but have to feel welcome. And that when that's the logic or the line of argument, then that can entail a number of things.
First, thanks for being here to share all of your thoughts and experiences with us. I really appreciate it. My name is Ryan Emerson. I'm an undergraduate in classical music performance, and I'm also in charge of campus dialoguing and tabling for ASU Students for Life, which is the pro-life club. I was just curious if, first, if you've experienced any censorship or First Amendment violations from a university or another university, because I'm assuming some, if not all of you have, and also how you responded to that.
So I had one speaker that I invited, John Derbyshire. He was a writer for National Review. He was fired from the National Review for writing his version of a talk that many minorities give to their children about policing and safety. And I invited him to campus to discuss his support for Donald Trump, and my college president disinvited him. So that was one experience that I had with censorship. And then beyond that, within social media bubbles, I've seen a number of things as well.
I think for me personally, in terms of being censored on ASU, that's not been the case for me, and I think that's somewhat of a luxury of being at the journalism program. I'm sure, Gabriel, you can say your piece on that as well, but we kind of live in a bubble where everyone knows the First Amendment and is, very happy to have that because it's so imperative to our jobs. But I would say the one caveat to that, and it's not necessarily a negative thing, but this is as close to an experience that I've had. As a journalist, our school is very concerned about how we present ourselves in terms of how other people may interpret our bias. And so, for example, when President Trump came and there was the rally, I went independently just to do my own coverage for my website and take photos and videos. And there were many professors and administrators who just gently advised, don't go. Just because if you're there and it looks like you're protesting or that you're, pushing a certain message, that could affect your credibility. And same thing when it came to the Women's March. They said, well, again, you can have these viewpoints, but just understand how that could affect if you want to have sources interview with you in the future. And so that's not a strict no, but it is just that kind of little, buzz in your ear. You're really like, oh no, maybe I shouldn't do this. I still went, but that's a choice just because I think that the ramifications of not doing something that I believe in or expressing myself honestly and being genuine is far worse than not getting a source in the future. So,
A couple quick examples, and I just want to point out that we could basically solve everything we were to talk about if we took President Zimmer of Chicago, cloned him, and put him everywhere, because the problems that we've had are almost entirely from students or other people in the Chicago area. We had Anita Alvarez, our former district attorney, who was by all accounts terrible, shut down at an event where students wanted to hold her accountable for being terrible, which really annoyed people that they could not challenge her in the one opportunity they were given to challenge her. Bassem Eid, a Palestinian human rights activist who supports Israel, was shut down. A student Israeli Independence Day event was shut down, and a Students for Life event was canceled ahead of time because people were chalking things like abort Mike Pence, and they thought, this would be problematic to do. But, so all of these things are by students, and even though that's clearly a problem at Chicago, it's still the vocal minority. I mean, in this year's first year class, in the poll our student newspaper did, 78%, I think, of self-identified hardcore progressives, 78 or 56, whatever, but a majority of hardcore progressives support a strict debate of dichotomy of free speech or emotional safety. So it is very much the loudest voices get the most attention, but so there have been problems, but never from our administration. They have really been excellent. Yeah,
what Taya talked about at Cronkite with the kind of public expression of your own ideas, I've experienced that, and what I've done in response is I express my ideas anyway. I just find a tactful way to do it. And I think so often, when we're dealing with censorship, it's almost like a chicken fight, because you can push back. Protest is speech. You can speak through protest. Holding an event anyway, off campus, like we said anyway, that's pushing your speech through censorship. So it's a bit of a fight, it's a negotiation, and it's certainly worth having. And I think as students, since the universities, they're for us, at least in part, and I think a huge part. So I think, you just have to push through it, and even if it means changing what the event's gonna look like, that tact and that navigation, that's gonna be true later on as well.
Thank you.
So we are at time. I would like you to thank our panelists because I think their voices are really important, particularly over the next couple days as we're intensely focused on this issue. I think it's really important to talk to the very same people who are at the crux of this issue every day of their lives. So thank you so much.
And thank you also to Dean Taylor for helping us to organize that panel and to moderate it. Before we break, just some informational advice for you. We borrowed an idea from PBS. We have tote bags. So everybody, student, faculty, staff, visitor from the community is welcome to take one of our bags. Inside is all kinds of information. I think also one of our Socratic t-shirts, why do students need free speech? The information includes information on courses and other experiential learning opportunities that the school organizes. That information is also in the back half of your program. So the first half of the program is about our conference. In the back half of the program is some more information about the year-long series on free speech and intellectual diversity, and also about our curriculum in a conventional sense in the classroom, our courses that we're teaching right now in our first year, but also our lineup of courses for fall 2018. And for the ASU students in the room, our minor has already been approved, minor in Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership. We hope for a good result at a University Faculty Senate meeting this coming week so that our major, our BA in Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership, that will also be approved. There's also a page in there about our experiential learning curriculum beyond the classroom walls. We are taking a group of ASU students to India over spring break to learn about the world's largest liberal democracy. We have 2 summer leadership institutes, one in May that students can apply for about Shakespeare and character and leadership from Sedona to stage. And at the end of the summer, just pre-fall, we have another leadership institute that we're calling Phoenix to Fresno about politics and division and dialogue about important American political and social issues. Those are all opportunities, and if you know high school students, we have our first summer institute, Leadership Institute for high school students, which will have a focus on First Amendment issues, an immersion residential week-long summer institute for high school students. So please get all those information opportunities in the program and in a tote bag. And we will be about 5 minutes late. We'll start the next panel in about 10 minutes at 20 minutes past the hour. Join me once again in thanking Dean Taylor and our student panelists.